Ko Hui Hua.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. We are presenting our book called Bilingual Project Learning in a Singapore Preschool. And this is the last session that we're having. This is our third session. We've had the last two in the last 2 weeks. So today we're going to be talking about crafting project questions for children. Just before we dive into the material, why do you want to switch on put on the slides? Yeah, so just before we start, just to also give some context, we're doing this along with ACES, which is the Association for Early Childhood Educators in Singapore. ACES has been pushing out content online ever since COVID happened, and I think we're looking at content that is based on best practices and also advocating for the early childhood profession in Singapore. Next up after us, we also have two other authors, also from the early childhood scene. They will be Bingwan and Gayatri. So that's happening for the next 3 weeks. Yeah, so with that, I think we can start, right, Hui Hua?
Yes, we're good to start. So the first up, let's share the agenda we have for today. So we've done our hellos. We're going to be going through the ladder, so you can kind of really see how we go about questioning. Okay, and we will also like to share with you the types in more details, the types of questions that we ask, and then asking questions the B2T way. And I will go into talking about the difference between asking questions for two-year-olds versus 6-year-olds. And then we will have questions for different activities, higher level questionings, and that's a wrap up. And goodbye. Okay, so Charmaine.
Yes.
Would you like to go?
Okay, so this is taken from our book. It's based on Bloom's taxonomy. We talked a bit about it in the last 2 weeks, and it really is about what kind of questions to ask, because we do projects. It is really important the kind of questions that we kind of pose to children, right? And I guess the big question is, why do we want to ask good questions? Why do we want to have our questions be big and open-ended, And a key reason for that is not just to push for language development, but also to push for critical thinking. But I think fundamentally the big picture is really to have children share their ideas, share their reflections, and I think most importantly, to make connections. So when we look at this ladder, what we did in the book was we set out a couple of projects according to age groups, and then we looked at the kinds of questions that you can ask. When we were writing the book, we actually reflected a lot about the fact that, or rather we observed that a lot of teachers ask really basic questions. And if you look at this ladder, a lot of them ask questions that are basically only on the first or second rung of this ladder, right? In terms of thinking skills. And when we look at it, we would call them the lower thinking skills, because things like memory, recall, or understanding, those are the kind of low-hanging fruit, right? In terms of understanding how much a child knows. But then if we can climb up the ladder and look at apply or evaluate, and then having the child be able to create, that also gives us a route towards having children reach for mastery, right? So it's also in line with a lot of early childhood theory, like ZPD, and pushing conversations so that the children can be pushed a little further, or rather extending conversations so that the children are in a position where they can think more, connect more dots, together with a guide, right, who is the teacher, right? So you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to why we decided to do it is really we 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 were so curious about what can come from children, and we want to continue to be in awe of like a child's voice, like a child's way of thinking, right? And that is actually really why we choose the project approach. And the other point really is that when we first started off with our team, it was hard for everyone really, because we hadn't come from a questioning culture, right? Or like a method in our own education or studies, because it was a big shift, right? Like 10, 12 years ago when we decided to do this. And a lot of teachers were just a lot more used to the thematic approach, right? And teaching. So what do we teach? And not really like what to ask. And that's why that is so exciting for us, because it's about questions, it's about conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just to also give some context, I mean, we very purposefully moved away from the thematic like themes, and also we were also quite resolved not to be dependent on activity sheets and whatnot, right? And so we really had to construct these questions, relevant questions, that were in line with the project, right? I think that was part of the whole emergent curriculum, to not just be comfortable with thinking through different kinds of complex questions that are age appropriate, but also to consistently do it every project, right? So that every teacher who is running a project will know, hey, this is a low level, this is not as a low level question, but this is like a low hanging fruit. And then, we're really aiming for mastery. So how do we do it? And I think it's a really good point of this is that you get to differentiate learning, because you get to work at a child's pace, and you really can you have an opportunity to build a relationship with the child in terms of like the to and fro, right? Yes, no, maybe.
Only I can answer you. Yes. but it was hard to get the engine started. So what was, I think, important for us to keep going at it, was to keep going at it, and to really not have the inertial, like, oh my gosh, how do I ask? And then there is that fear of asking the wrong question. So we really just always did a lot of brainstorming. And what really helped was just being in a group and just throwing questions, initially at first, right? Without just caring about lower level, higher level, but just going through that process. And then we distinguish, like, okay, actually
categorize.
Yeah, categorize. So it's really going back to the very simple logic of practice makes perfect. We just have to keep trying. So the amazing thing is
and also we rest a lot on like research-based stuff, right? I mean, I think there's so much material available out there that we really went like searching for it, but we also were able to find a lot of resources online. And we'll talk about it later, but we'll talk about like the types of questions that we ask, right? But I mean, if we can just look at this ladder again very quickly, if you look at the different categories under the Bloom's taxonomy, a remember question is really like for a child to recognize or to list or to remember, to recall. And then when you go up and you are able to show understanding, that's when you can interpret something, right? Interpret the meaning of something, you can clarify something, and that's already pretty good, right? Then when the child or the children are able to apply knowledge to new situations, then it gets very interesting, right? Because they can actually start using what they know and then show it somewhere else, right? And then as you go to analyze, evaluate, that's when, the child starts to have an opinion, right? And starts being able to have that internal conversation with himself or herself to decide or to predict something, right? And I think then at creativity, you know, what the things that are created are then, I mean, it really gives meaning to the word masterpiece, right? Because then they're able to master something and then they produce something, right?
Right.
Next.
Next. Yes.
We've been through this many times. That's why we're like, so what's the word for your right? Okay, so anyway, this title of a typology of classroom questions. This was originally from the Project Zero website. When we first started, we obviously were very interested in multiple intelligences and Howard Gardner and his work. So what we did was we trawled through a lot of the free resources, but we also tried to localize it and really make it material for our local teachers to use. And this piece of, this is a very old sheet, but really it sets out the kinds of questions that we want our teachers to be sensitive to be aware of, right? So when I don't know if you can see it clearly, but the 5 different categories are, again, they reflect the ladder, but they are also, we set out examples of questions, just so that it gives context to our teachers. But the 5 categories are recalling and reviewing knowledge. The second one, so that first one is to remember, right? And then the second one is to explore. So then it's generating, right? The idea is to actually share questions now. And then the third one is construction, when you're actually co-building new understanding. Right, and then you've got procedural, which is more sequencing. So that is more directing the work of the class. It's almost like logistics, but it's also giving structure to the, not just to the teacher or the class, but to the process that they are all involved in. And then the fifth one is facilitative, which is when you are promoting the learner's own thinking and understanding. So you're really facilitating that, or rather, I mean, another word I can think of is like scaffolding, right? You're really building the next few connectors. You know, if you're really building a scaffold, for example. Yeah, so I mean, we thought it would be interesting to show everyone like the types of questions that that come up or that we want to categorize, and also we're quite mindful of what kinds of questions to ask at which stage of the project, right? Because like say for example, for stage 1, when we're trying to see if children are interested in a certain topic, then what we would be doing is we would be recalling things just to understand how much knowledge they have about a certain subject. For example, back to the supermarket project, you know, a simple question under recalling would be, hey, do you guys know what's sold at the supermarket? Or do you know who works at the supermarket? Or what do you like to buy at the supermarket? You know, so that's like really just we ask those questions at phase 1 because we're trying to get a picture, right, a snapshot of where they are. But then once we know that they are interested and we're building it, then the generative and the constructive questions start coming up, you know, like, you know, and then they can be questions that even the teacher doesn't know the answer to. And this is all, I think the process is also very important because we try and make the questions visible, right? Wow.
Yes.
It's an important thing that we push for, that questions should be made visible.
So how that happens is a lot of the class conversations, the teachers will actually be drawing out this web of discussion, you know. So it's wonderful because first of all, that it really is setting that culture of questioning, right? Of like having airing anyone's questions that they have, you know. They can really address, try and find out what they're curious about. And the other thing that is so lovely is because the teacher is accepting questions from everyone in the classroom. It is a very inclusive kind of a practice where anyone can ask a question and they visibly see it, like their question being written like on the whiteboard. So a lot of times, sometimes not even just whiteboard, we have it on sheets of paper. So then these sheets of paper get pasted on the walls, and they remain on the wall throughout the whole projects. So you will see different webs of different types of questions that come up from the children. And that's so lovely, because then the other teachers also get to see a chance of the types of questions that are being asked, or like when our parents, pre-COVID-19, because we have a very open door policy at B2T, where parents send their children up to the classroom, and they explore the classroom as well. They get to see what's on the wall. They get to see the kind of questions that are being asked, and they know which child asks which questions. And that's the quest that child has for that project. Yeah. That's what I like to say.
Yeah.
And
so, but I mean, honestly, do we still use these? I mean, this was done in quite a while back, right? I think honestly, like, we use the ladder now, but this is actually a pretty good way to break it down too, right?
It's good because it has, I mean, it's just a good exercise to go through with the team once in a while, like a revision, because it just reminds us of all the different detailed kind of questioning we can have. The different types, whether it's a task completion kind of question, it's a clarifying questions, right? Or whether it is really an essential questions that will prompt the exploration. So I think this is what we really appreciate about this list when we found it on the Harvard website.
Do we use these questions for teachers?
I think so. I don't know if Yu Jie and Sharon are online to answer that.
Maybe they can shout out a little bit, but yeah, I mean, essentially the process is the same for children and for adults, right? In terms of knowledge acquisition.
Yeah. And actually, one more point, just this part when you're talking about recalling, right? I think the good thing about really every time just starting at that recalling stage was also, we found that it becomes a very useful portion for us to know where the children are starting from. I mean, it's good for evaluation, right? Because we are always doing up the children's, trying to just take a wider scope of view of what the child has gone through, what they have learned. So seeing their portfolio from that sense is always so amazing, the beginning part of the project book versus the end of the project book, and all that goes in between. Yeah.
So, I mean, I also have another thought, right? Like, when we are talking about, we're pushing for good questions to be asked. I think we should also clarify that we're not pushing for complex questions to be asked like 100% of the time, right? The low rung ones are actually very important, right? Because the repetition of these questions are actually also, they serve different functions. But the idea also is that, I don't know if you could choose a percentage, what would it be if it was like so-called easier questions versus more complex questions?
I don't know, maybe 40-60. But I want to say
40 for like basic questions. I would go like 70-30 actually.
Yeah.
Because how do you, when you want to extend and show mastery and all that, how do you can't be making all of that all the time, right?
No, but I mean, like the 40 is the first 2 or 3 parts, right? Of the ladder.
So Dr. Chen, hello, good evening, Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen has just written a question, which is, why is recalling important?
Oh, did I not just answer?
Say it again.
Why is recalling important? Okay, the other point I have is actually, simple questions are so important because I find that it is a very easy way of inviting a child in, or for a child to participate. It's like it's lower level thinking, if you may say, but it's also very low stakes, right?
Yeah, it's a good
it-
entry point for everyone.
yeah. So in that way, I find that is definitely like important anchor, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, okay, I mean, I guess it's also linked to why is recalling questions important. And I mean, for me, when we actually look at what kind of questions to ask, I mean, not just to, I agree that it provides a good entry point, an easy entry point for children to join in, but it also sets out where the individual or group learning is, like where they are at, right? It frames it, correct? And I mean, of course, in a typical structured manner, it would show you whether you know or you don't know, right? But I think in a project setting, it basically sets the context for the next step, or it actually steers the direction of a project, correct?
Yes, because the teacher will get a sense of like, these are the general consensus of like what they know, right? Or what the
Mm-hmm.
children are curious to ask, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the starting point, right, of the map that she draws out with the children.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Shall we go on to the next one? So I think these pages set out yeah, so Dr. Chen just wrote, so it's important and a good start and not a testing question. For sure. I mean, the testing is not a grading. I think the testing is really a sense for the teacher to get a sense, right, of the class, but it's not a grading. It's not an assessment, correct?
Never. I don't think we've ever used it in that way where we are assessing where the child is or can or cannot do, but really just,
Yeah.
you know, where are they coming in from, right? The kind of like I don't know, the kind of curiosity that they
Yeah,
that
and
they
I
have.
think also, I mean, just from our body language, the possibility of it being a test or an assessment is really quite, it's antithetical, is that what the word, the antithesis of our asking good questions, right? I mean,
Yes.
when we are asking good questions, it's all based around the spirit of inquiry
Yes.
and
Yeah.
of learning, of group learning even, you know, and not so much for a grade. So I think, yeah, that was a good point to make though. So back to these slides, these pages actually are set out in the book, and we actually frame the questions for readers to answer in the B2T way. So if you notice, I mean, in our first chapter, for example, you know, we kind of ask questions that, again, are low hanging fruit, right? It kind of is a little provocation for you to kind of consider your own context, you know, not just like which part of the world you're in, and what languages you speak, but really just to give a snapshot for yourself to kind of see where you are. And then when we go on to questions like what are real world problems young children can work on, that is obviously not a low hanging fruit. That involves an opinion, right? It could very well be a restating of something you've read, which then would, yes, be a lower thinking skill. But a lot of times educators and parents have a very personal investment in questions like these, right? Like I mean, right off the bat, we know for a fact that sustainability is a huge problem that young children can actually be aware of, you know, in an appropriate way, right?
Yeah, don't get me started. I'll talk nonstop about this.
Maybe you can a little bit, because I think it's worth giving some airtime to the sustainability issues.
Well,
you want me to give you a bit more context, because I know your eco warrior pains are vast. Okay, let me give you plastic.
There's so many things you can do about plastic, right? Really,
Plastic bags in Singapore.
Well, just sharing the hierarchy of R's, right? And the first one being reduce and not recycle or reuse, because I mean we're so used to saying, yeah, it's okay to take, but because we will reuse it, right? Or we will recycle it, but really teaching the habit of refusing it if possible, if at all, when it's possible. Yeah. So that's really, say, like one project that the children can get on top of. And it's exciting with 5 and 6 year olds, because when they believe something, they really go all out with their heart, and they can be like the best advocates ever, right? Yeah. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. So I mean these questions are really, I mean when you do go through the book, when you get the book, you will know that these questions are really targeted to kind of not just provoke thinking, but to also develop along a continuum some sort of like knowledge scale on where you are, your context, what are you trying to do as an educator and as a or as a parent, you know, what do you want for your children's education? What do you, and not just what do you want, but what kind of learning, what kind of content, you know, what kind of questions do you want to have in your classroom or in your family environment, you know? So these are all different questions to kind of be thoughtful about that. And I think we got our reflections from just observing our teachers in Between Two Trees preschool, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Next slide.
More questions.
Oh. Yeah,
Yeah,
so I mean, as we carry on, I mean, we also looked at Asian values, food culture, temperature, outdoors, safe spaces. And then after that, we ask the reader to apply that, right? To start envisioning that and planning that. Yeah.
So that's kind of cool, right? That's the top of the letter where we are. I mean, it's really an invitation to create your own learning process with your child or your children, you know, that you can apply. So hopefully it is a useful tool. I mean, just going through these questions and really coming from your own perspective what they are. And we would love to hear your story if you would like to go through these questions and then share. Or if you really Shah, maybe we'll talk about it later, right? The 20 books, Shah.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Should I go on to the next one?
Ooh, I see Sharon has spoken. Yeah, go on to the next one, please.
Okay.
Oh, the next one's yours, yes.
Yes. So we just wanted to touch a bit because we remember that there were questions asked about whether the young ones can work on projects, you know, like the 18 months, 2-year-olds, can they work on projects? And our answer was yes. So we wanted to now show in this session, show the difference in the kind of questions that would have been laid out for a 2-year-old versus a 6 years old, right? So you just taking a look, you can see that the questions asked for the 2-year-olds, they look a lot simpler, right? I mean, just even in the way the sentences are constructed, right? Versus the 6-year-olds.
Do you want to read it
got
out?
more
Because I don't
details.
know if it's clear enough, because I'm looking at it on my screen. It's not super clear, you know.
Oh, okay. So I'll give the example of the elephant and the giraffe, because the young ones did a project on zoo. You know, for those who were not in our previous session, that's what we covered as well. So a lower level kind of question, like for remembering, is what does the giraffe eat, right? And then going on to a question that seeks their understanding, like, is a giraffe as tall as a double-decker bus? Okay. And then in getting inviting them to show or relate to, we'll ask, how does a giraffe move? So that's where a child, you know, a 2-year-old can really maybe show you, right? Because they've watched a video together with the class, you know, a document, part of the documentary maybe, you know, or they have gone to the zoo and they've come back and they have done a lot of observation time of how the giraffes it's like was moving or eating the leaves, right? So they might demonstrate it to you, okay? And then the teacher might also ask, the next level, like why does a giraffe have a long neck, right? Um, and they would think like versus all the other animals that they know. And then to evaluate, can a giraffe live in your home? So that requires the 2-year-old to think like how big the giraffe is and how big their home is, right? And whether it can really fit. And the last in inviting them to create or to build their own interpretation of this whole experience is really okay. Let's paint a life-size giraffe, and that was actually something that was done in the classroom. No, actually outdoors. You know, in the Trites area where the teacher invited everyone to chip in and paint not really life size, but really huge giraffe for them to really feel how big a giraffe can get. Okay, so that's what it is for a 2-year-old versus the 6-year-olds. Okay, I'll go through again from the bottom. It's really that recalling, like the teachers asking, oh, how many types of shoes do you have? You know, or your when you go or when you're at home, right? Your sister, your brother, right? Your mom, your dad. What are the types of shoes? And that's so amazing because we learned that some of our families really have their hiking shoes or their snow boots, right? Because they go skiing sometimes, right? Or sometime of the year, right? So it creates such a it's just recalling, but it gets us excited just knowing what can come from each household, right? Then there you go, we have the second level of questioning, you know, that seeks understanding, like, oh, what are the different shoes for different occasions? So that's when they share, right? Like the football shoes, the army shoes, okay? And then next question, the next level of question is what are the types of materials used to make shoes? So that's where they really started their investigation of like really touching, feeling, and trying to discern one material from the other, or dunking the shoes in like pails of water to find out what's waterproof or not waterproof, right? And then analyzing what are the strengths or weaknesses of each material, you see, that are used to secure the shoes to our feet, okay? Examples of materials are laces, Velcro straps, buttons and clips. So which one do you like? Which one do you prefer, you know, and why? You know, what do they do? What's their function? Okay. And then to evaluate, which pair of shoes would you choose to wear to hike up the mountain? Why? Right? Examples of shoes to consider are hiking boots or sport shoes or sandals, or would you wear your rain boots? Okay, so a child really needs to kind of like assess, right? And think for themselves, right? Or hypothesize, like, I think I'm going to choose sport shoes because I can go really fast. But is that the best pair of shoes? Then it becomes like a classroom conversation as well, right? And then the last is like the teacher having an invitation. Okay, let's set up a shoe shop in the classroom. And how would you, if it was your shop, what would you call it? You know, how would you display your shoes? And how would you recommend them to customers? What would you say? How do you persuade them to buy, you know, this pair of shoes versus the other pair of shoes? So in doing all that, you really get to see that individual child, the individual child's input, and that's what we are going for, right? I mean, that's what we are inviting, so that we can really see, you know, different colors of creation. Okay, so generally you would see like between like the 2-year-olds and the 6-year-olds, the 2-year-olds one, it can be based on a lot more of a sensorial experience, you know, whereas I think for the older one, there's a lot of invitation to really uh, think and to make connection to the world, and to you know, tap into like the relevance, right? and asking for the active participation as a citizen. So a really good example of a 6-year-old project I can think of is the bird project by the K2s. You know, it was so wonderful because I think they were just curious because they always hear birds in school, right? So it started from like just having the teacher inviting them to draw the birds, right? And then maybe having a bird feed in the garden, then trying to make like bird houses that to invite them to be in, and then later on then talking about different types of birds, right? So naturally they went to the bird park, right? And then they got interested in um, the hornbills, you know, and they found out that there is actually a conservation project in Singapore, like conservation of the hornbills. And so what they did when they came back was really to make bird sculptures of the birds that of their favorite birds, and then it became a silent art auction in our school's art studio, right? So parents or uncles or aunties could come to this auction and, you know, offer to pay a certain amount, and all these monies then went to the zoo. So the children did a second trip where they contributed this the money that they all collected to this conservation project. So I think that was so wonderful, and really going through the whole process with a child, from just merely being interested in the tweeting, you know, and the movement of birds in our own school, to just going out there and really seeing how their action can make a difference. Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Shah?
Nope. I think, can we backtrack a bit? Why like big picture, why are we differentiating questions that we ask a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old? I mean, right off, I mean, I kind of have a view on that, obviously, but I mean, for me, I mean, obviously, because they are able, a 6-year-old would presumably have more language skills, right? So definite, and more experience, right? A 6-year-old has 4 years on a 2-year-old, right? So obviously, the bank is a bit bigger. But I mean, I think also we're trying to show this because this ladder is applicable to every age group in that sense, right? We're trying to show what would be age appropriate per level, right? With lots and lots of assumptions being made, but the idea is that this ladder can be applied to every age, correct? We have a few questions. I'm wondering if we can just go through them first before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Chen asks, do we push children or encourage and inspire them to be involved in the learning process? I mean, I think the word push, encourage, inspire, you know, I would not say push, right? I would say like the provocation is there. It's really whether or not the children are interested. But I think that underlying that is that philosophy, that idea that we respect what children want, and we respect that they are capable of learning what they're interested in, right? And so our job is to, I wouldn't say our job is to make it interesting, but our job is to provoke an interest in something, right? So the word inspire, I would go with inspire, right? I mean, involved in the learning process, they are involved in the learning process because it's their learning process, right? It's not, I mean, a teacher may have a learning process too, but we are also predominantly interested in the children's learning process, correct?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, for example, there are times where a teacher would say, look, this child is not interested in going to the easel at all. right? So I cannot get my painting from him, right? Yeah. So then it's really not the conversation about saying, oh, then tell him that he has to go there by Friday. It's really then for us is stepping back and going like, why is the child not interested in the easel, right? And what is he interested in? What is he needing now, right? Yeah, I think, yeah, so in that way, in our space, projects are important, like asking good questions are important, but always at the basis of all this, the child is important.
Yeah.
Knowing the needs of the child is important.
Yeah.
So in that way, I would say that our manner is never to push so that the child can learn more, get more, and know more, but really encourage, invite, right? And see where and see what response we get from there, and move from there. It's
Yeah,
really a
and I
very
think another
live
word
thing.
another word I would use is also, the experience should be meaningful, right? That is
Yeah.
our marker.
Yeah.
But then I do see the question. I mean, I can see where the question is leading to, because everyone has, I mean, within a school setting, within a preschool setting, there's so many so-called competing interests, right? The teacher has got to have accountability. The school has got to have, the teacher has got to have accountability to, like, for example, the curriculum coordinator. The school has accountability and deliverables towards the parents to evidence what they've done, right? I mean, therein lies the pitfalls of a customer service relationship, right? You pay for what parents pay for what they get, and they need to see what they can get, right? And I think in Singapore and in any other very urban country, that is quite accurate, right? So I mean, just kind of wondering. I mean, like, say for example, I know Ling Qi has some questions which are like, is there an ideal duration that each project should extend over? I mean, in the ideal world, the project can run for as long as it runs, as long as the children are interested and they are learning, correct? But
Yeah.
in our real world, in our lives at B2T in Singapore, we have chosen to target for projects to last a term, or at the most two, right? Because
Yeah.
we've gone through many rounds of projects going on for a long time. And if we were truly to say, oh, we're going to stand by this philosophy, this theory that we work off children and we are truly emergent, we are purely emergent, then we have to go along with as long as a child is interested. But we've negotiated that so much. And I think also because we've brought in the idea of our Asian values, right? There are other things that are important to us on top of a child's learning can originate from a child, right? So to answer Ling-Ti's question, is there an ideal duration? The ideal duration, it depends on who's asking it. The child, it's as long as the child is interested, right? To a parent, it's what's efficient, right? To maximize learning, I would assume, for many parents in Singapore, right?
Yeah.
And then the next question is, should there be an active push to have your child move along the project flow by inching him towards different aspects of the topic to broaden the exposure? I love this. We leave them to meander on what seems like forever. So I think in the real world, I mean not in the real world, in B2T itself, I mean, the projects also do have a natural lifespan, correct? I mean, I think Yijie and Sharon can correct us if we're wrong, but as far as we know, the projects do tend to kind of fizzle out at a certain point, right? When they've made something, unless it leads on to a new project, correct?
Can I also say, like it's so interesting. If you're the teacher who is asking this question, you know, I would say if that the question that you just verbalized, right? If it's really a teacher who's asking that question, then it also means the project would end soon because the teacher is not very interested, right? Yeah, as in, this is a very real uh, um, factor. Like I find that the teacher has to be interested as well, right? Like I went through a project with Dong Lao Shi, or almost wanted to go through a project. Did we do it like on insects? I think we did it for a really short period of time because she was really scared of insects, right? And I was fascinated but scared as well, you know. So we were really trying to follow the children's lead. But I'm saying that sometimes when the teachers are really not able to take it on in different ways and they try to reach out uh, in different places and they can't, it yeah, like you say, it dies a natural death too, you know.
Yeah, and I'm so happy because Sharon has actually asked these questions like when you're observing a child painting, what questions would you ask? When you're observing a child stacking blocks or arranging boundaries, what questions would you ask to find out more, to
That's
extend
fantastic.
the play? That's actually what we planned for, Sharon. So
Yes.
we actually wanted to talk about asking good questions across different activities, you know. So that's a great one. I mean, why don't you take painting? I mean, okay, wait, can I back up? Backing up basically is giving the context of we're asking good questions, predominantly, we're intentionally, purposefully asking questions. And the idea of that is to really challenge children to learn new concepts, right? And in so doing, we're actually reaching for the higher rungs, right? Those are the exciting questions to us. So what we're trying to do is we're encouraging children to analyze, evaluate, create. Those are the top 3 rungs of the ladder, correct? So I mean, maybe I don't know if we have time, but maybe can you talk a little bit about painting? What kind of questions? We can't do all the activities, but maybe for painting and blocks we can do it. So with, maybe I can just jump in. Maybe for blocks, you know, um, a create question could be, what are you building today, right? An analyze question would be, which way worked faster? Did building this boundary was building this boundary faster than when you actually stacked it, you know? So that would be an analyze question. And an evaluation question would be like, why didn't building it this way work? You know, if you could change, what would you change about building it this way? You know, so uh, those would be the 3 categories, right, of questions. And I think it's also important for the teachers to plan that out per activity, correct?
I'm thinking also, okay, so um for example, like an analyze question would really be, oh wow, look at how, you know, this color, like how the watercolor is working on this paper, right? Like why is it this way? How is it different from acrylic paint that we used yesterday, right? And evaluate is really like, oh, do you think we can use this clay like to build the house? You know, this terracotta clay, can it hold? Okay, or like creating is really just an invitation, right? Like would you like to create a dragonfly using this wire? Actually, I've just gone like all different art medium, I realized, you know, but just thinking in terms of art. But I also pause. I think one point too, and I'm very sensitive to it when it comes to art making, right? Is I think or even uh, building blocks and stuff. But I think the teacher also needs to have the sensitivity to know when to ask questions, right? Because sometimes a child just wants to paint and not be asked so many questions when, you know, when he or she is painting, right? Or creating something, because you're kind of like in your own zone and space and really enjoying the process of creation. And same for block building. So I mean, yes, we have a quest for asking good questions, but I guess it's also based on, like I said, a teacher sensitivity to know when is a good time to ask questions. Yeah, and to moderate
That's
it.
really a good point, eh? Because I mean, sometimes the silence is also an invitation, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm wondering if, I mean, doing a little bit of time check here, we have about 10 more minutes. Can we move on to the last bit, which is how do we purposefully stretch conversations and what are our tips, you know, to when, especially when we want to ask good questions, when we're in that inquiry-led kind of approach, right? How do we ask our questions? I think the first one I would say is like, really to, I mean, and also drawing on your point earlier, it's really for the educator or the adult or the parent to listen, right? And also maintain very active listening strategies, right? Make eye contact, you know, restate what the child is saying, repeat it, summarize it, you know, in a way that allows that nice to and fro, right? And I think a very related strategy or tip is to also allow a lot of time, right? Like prepare to wait, because every child processes a question differently. You know, there could be so many reasons or so many ways a child can respond, right? And kind of not rush the child through it, right? There has to be that waiting time. And I think also a good point also to insert right now is that it varies because each child is an individual. And we're not just categorizing a child according to high ability, low ability, on point. You know, we're not doing that. We're more of like we're having a conversation with a child and we're giving that wait time, right?
Mm.
And I think also it's important to have a big picture view of like what the material, why are you using a certain material, or why are you doing a certain activity? You know, why are you painting, for example? What is the purpose of that? And I think a lot of questions can then flow from why you are doing a certain thing. I mean, that's that idea of being purposeful and being and having it injecting like your intention, right? You're carrying out what you're trying to achieve through questions, right?
Mm. Mm.
Oh, and then we also talked about making questions visible, because I mean, visible not just in word form, right? It could always be in a visual format. It could always be a visual reminder, but essentially questions that are up also really um, goes into a child's mindscape, right?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
I think for me, listening to what you say, uh, it reminds me. I mean, I really like the part about how your point about how each child is an individual. It just reminds me that we were so enthralled with this the Reggio Emilia approach from the start because of the 100 languages, you know, and it's really to remember that like every child can express uh, his or her response to your same question in so many different ways, right? And sometimes it may not even be right away. It could be a day or two later that they come back to you, you know, a week later, and they say, but you know, I thought of this, right? And it's a response to a question you asked way back, you know.
Yeah.
And that's so lovely. Like that's
Yeah,
so
totally.
lovely. And the other thing is also a reminder for educators and parents that um, we are really modeling conversations all the time. You know, our children are always listening. They are great listeners too. So really, if we want to talk about creating, I mean, getting them to ask good questions or creating good conversations, it really comes from our own practice of having that modeling how we are, or just being aware of how we are talking, right, and listening. Um, and I think one good practice is also sometimes to show children that to verbalize that, oh, I have this question and I'm thinking of it and I'm breaking it down, because I kind of feel like maybe children don't see it enough, right? Because we are always holding so many thoughts in our head, and we tend to want to put out things that are prepared. But it may be interesting for them to visibly see like, oh, okay, I got to move this table. So what should I do first? Okay, let me put away the chairs to the side and I'll do that. Sometimes just verbalizing something like that might be interesting for them to really see our way of thinking. Just talking about,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So we have 6 minutes left, right? Or 5 minutes.
Yeah. Do we want to run down our slides? I think just
I
to
think
do a quick one.
this is the end already.
Okay, so maybe we
Yeah.
can just quickly summarize and then we can go to our book. I think today we we basically wanted to do a breakdown of crafting project questions, because for the past 2 sessions, we've been going deeper into why we wrote our book, setting the context of Singapore, and also what kind of projects we've done. And then today we've actually looked at what are good questions for us, how we ask good questions, and we kind of tried to look at the different categories of questions across the ladder, but also to break down what kinds of questions, like the typology of questions, right? And again, that we've been inspired by, and we've also benefited from a lot of free resources online. So one of them is Project Zero as well, where they are very they've put a lot of good stuff online. And then we also tried to look at how we've invited readers to respond to certain provocation questions and certain levels of questions, just so that they can craft their own vision or learning board on how they want to have their classroom environment or family environment be, and also to decide what their children should be learning and how. And after that, we also differentiated between questions that we would ask a 2-year-old and questions that we would ask a 6-year-old. The intention of that was really to show that this ladder that we based off Bloom's taxonomy can apply for every single age group. It's just about whether or not the planning is crucial, and B, it's also being very thoughtful of how it is age appropriate according to where the children are developmentally, right? And then we also considered asking different kinds of questions across the activities that happen in a Singapore preschool or any preschool, like in the dramatic area, in the blocks area, in the making area, at painting, at water play. I mean, there's so many questions that we can ask, and it's really also just one questioning, going back to the main question, which is how to be intentional, how to have that intentionality, and how to be purposeful in asking these questions, with the aim to challenge children to learn new concepts. And then we also looked at higher level questions, which were really the top 3 rungs of the ladder, which is evaluate, analyze, and create. And we shared a couple of questions that fall under each category. And the last one that we did was we also set out a few of our strategies and tips on how to purposefully stretch conversations. So we added in the tips that we would practice. And I think the key point is to allow for response time, to allow for that wait time, and to also really listen, and listen with your body, i.e. with your eyes, eye contact, and also repetition and restating and summarizing. I think that's very important. And I think, we also talked about, like, our intention is not to ask tough questions all the time, right? It's really like, I go for a 70-30. Hui Hua goes for a what? 40-60?
I assume.
Yeah. So I mean, that's all rough numbers, but the idea really is that we're not trying to get children to constantly be at the top rung. That's really impossible. I mean, the first few rungs have to be climbed a couple of times before even the top rungs are reached, right? Yeah. So we're at 8:59. Maybe I can then now go on to the back of this, which is we are actually really happy to support ACES in this. And we are happy to also give away 20 books for free if you are interested, please can you email us? Our email addresses are here. Ignore the second address, email huihua.co@gmail.com directly. And then we will make sure we get that book to you. The other thing is, can you go to the last page?
Can you hear my?
I know I heard it.
That's all.
Join us on Instagram. Please add us at Bilingual Project Learning. If you're going to be posting anything, hashtag us as well. We're new writers. This is like our blood work, heart work for the past years. So we're excited to see where this leads. And obviously, this is also a real offering also to our current teachers who have grown up with us. They know who they are. And of course, Hui Jia also. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Yeah, and that's it. It's 9 o'clock. So if you are interested, please reach out and ask for a free book. We're giving out 20. Thank you again to Dr. Chen and of course Derek and everyone on EXCO. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.